You're listening to the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast, the leading resource for real estate investors who want to dominate their market online. Dan Barrett is the founder of AdWords Nerds, a high-tech digital agency focusing exclusively on helping real estate investors like you get more leads and deals online, outsmart your competition, and live a freer, more awesome life. And now, your host, Dan Barrett.
All right, hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast. As always, this is Daniel Barrett here from AdWordsNerds.com. And look, if you are looking to get more leads and deals online for your real estate investing business, you know where to go. It is the OGs in this game, AdWordsNerds.com. Over a decade, generating motivated sellers online, and we are not slowing down. If anything, we are speeding up. All right, folks, I've got a great interview for you this week. I'm talking to Gary Lipsky from breakofdaycapital.com. Gary has been a real estate investor since 2002 and has invested in over 2,800 units with a $161 million asset under management. Gary is also the co-founder of the Asset Management Summit, the Real Estate Asset Management Podcast, and co-author of the best-selling book, Best in Class. His expertise in asset management is his secret sauce. And I'll tell you, we dig into his background. He has a truly amazing and deeply varied entrepreneurial background, everything from starting a food delivery service in college to helping at-risk youth develop leadership skills, to real estate, to writing and producing and directing films. We get into it all. Gary brings a really fun point of view to this real estate game, and I think you're really going to enjoy my conversation with Gary Lipsky. All right, what's up, everybody? This is Daniel Barrett, and I am here with Gary Lipsky from Break of Day Capital. Gary, how are you, man? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I was joking like before we came on the video that it's Break of Day Capital with an A, breakofdaycapital.com, because I always mix up how you spell capital in the capitalist context. So there's so much stuff I want to dig into. You are touching a whole bunch of different parts of the real estate investing landscape. For people that don't know you and maybe don't know too much about Break of Day, what is Break of Day Capital? What do you guys do? What's your sort of niche within real estate?
Yeah, we are value-add multifamily buyers, typically in Phoenix and Tucson. We're not chasing deals all over the country. We want to be experts in only a few markets, and we've been doing it for years. So you develop strong broker relationships. You've looked at most deals in Phoenix and Tucson. So we have thousands of data points. And, this way allows us to get off-market deals. We're able to move fast on things that we like. And usually all of our deals are because we've moved fast. We were one of the first people to see it, or we put an offer from the beginning. That gives us an edge. And if we were chasing deals all over the country, we wouldn't have that edge. And we bought deals with some hair on it. My creative side gives me a little bit of edge to kind of look at things differently and solve other people's problems, so we can find more meat on the bones.
Let me ask you about that. You mentioned like you want to be an expert in a very particular thing, right? Which in this case is the Phoenix market, the Tucson market. I want to ask about that decision because I think a lot of people struggle with it a little bit. It's one of these sort of entrepreneurial truisms that you should pick a niche or you should pick a very specific target. Talk a little bit about why you decided to focus where you're focused, because I think for a lot of investors, a lot of business owners, just in general, right, there's some pressure to feel like you don't want to turn anything down, right? And so it's like money. I could get some money by going over here. I could get some money by broadening over here, or it's not exactly in my wheelhouse, but it's a deal. So how did you guys make the decision to focus where you're focused, and kind of how does that impact how your business kind of runs today? Does that make sense?
Well, in real estate in general, you hear of like, Airbnbs and long-term, all these different ways to make money. And that was a decision I made early on, is I'm going to pick multifamily. It speaks to me because I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. It's like running a business. And so I'm gonna take away all that other noise, all those other investment opportunities, different asset classes, and focus on multifamily. Then I'm going to narrow down my focus on just a few markets because, yeah, there's Texas, there's some great markets there. Florida, there's some great markets. But I can't be super competitive if, I'm not there, if I don't have boots on the ground, if I'm not focused on that area. And that ability to focus on an area allows me to, protect my investors, most importantly, because I know what things are coming down the pipeline, how, where occupancy is drifting lower, rents are kind of, topping out, or we could be a lot more aggressive on rent. So having that local knowledge is so important. It gives you an edge, and that's a huge difference for investors.
Yeah, I totally agree, right? It's the same philosophy that we have, right? Like we were very focused on working with real estate investors, and then within that, even just motivated seller leads, and then within that, even primarily just Google ads, right? You get a lot more pattern matching, like a lot faster pattern recognition, I think, right? When you're really sort of focused in. So how did you get started in real estate in the first place, right? You mentioned your sort of creative side. I know you have kind of creative background. So like, what was your pathway into what you're doing today?
So most people are going to have a different answer than me, but I'm going to say my very first house, my personal residence, was an investment. I didn't look at it like my parents did, as a forever home. And I was looking for an up and coming neighborhood, not the nicest house where I can add some value. We bought it in 2002. We can open up the kitchen. We converted the garage into an office space that my company rented because I need to make sure I could, be able to pay my mortgage. I didn't have, we didn't put any money down. We didn't have, savings at that point. So I needed that extra income from my business to pay for that. And then from there, I was able to kind of ride that into the next neighborhood. And eventually I turned that house into a rental. And I've been looking at some smaller stuff, and not until I sold the business at the end of 2016 did I get into real estate full time and really multifamily. And
so how old were you when the first house, which wasn't the forever home, you're thinking of it as an investment? How old were you at that point?
Yeah, so I was 33, and I'd been looking for a while. I had a kid on the way, and at that time I thought, hey, I missed out. I should have bought earlier. These prices are insane. That house is worth, over 3 times the amount of what I paid for now. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
And I've been very lucky, and I think it's part of a skill, but like picking the right neighborhoods to kind of like extract a lot of money out of my house that I've now, the place I live in now, I've refied twice, pulled out money, and yeah, I'll gladly pay the 4%, and I'm making 20, 30% of my money in my own deals. Really more, but it's just the arbitrage is fantastic.
So were you, and you said you were, kind of going back to that first house, you're 33, kid on the way. What was your business at that point? Because you mentioned that your business rented the office. Was that real estate at that time, or that was pre-real estate?
Yeah, it's pre-real estate. I had just started a business maybe like 6 months before. We were running after-school programs, outdoor ed, and leadership development for mostly at-risk kids in LA. I had grown that by the time I sold that in 2016 to working with 9,000 kids daily. And we had over 700 employees and about 700 independent contractors.
Wow, that is gigantic.
Want to find motivated seller leads online, but don't know where to start? Download our free Motivated Seller Keyword Report today. AdWords nerds have spent over $5 million this year researching the most profitable keywords for finding motivated seller leads. And you can grab these exact keywords when you download our report at www.adwordsnerds.com/keywords.
I have like 5 employees, and I feel like that's 4 employees too many a lot of the time. So I cannot imagine. Okay, so I definitely want to come back to that, but I want to talk a little bit about kind of breaking down the specifics, right? Because I think a lot of people will say, they hear you say, you were looking for a neighborhood, right? That's up and coming. you're sort of buying it early. Even at the time, you were like, "Oh, I missed them." It's like everybody else feels like they missed it, right? It's too late now. Prices are crazy, but you were trying to buy early, right, with the idea that you can add value. So, like, put yourself back in your shoes. You're 33. What specifically did you look at or think about when it came down to picking that neighborhood? Were you trying to project out like demographic trends? Were you looking at like, was it as personal as like, oh, the bar I like is in this neighborhood and the rest of it's kind of run down? Like, how did you make that decision back then? Because obviously you didn't have all the experience you have now. Did you remember what that process was like?
Yeah, it was very rudimentary. It was, I wasn't checking all the data that I have at my fingertips now, but I knew, okay, I could buy a lot more house by a freeway. Now, long term, that wouldn't really make sense. So I was looking for, kind of family friendly things that were near areas that were growing. So not super expensive, but like, okay, I feel like more and more people are going to be drifting into this neighborhood. You saw, people investing in their homes. So I felt like that was a good place. I can get some good value out of that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your business before you got into real estate. You mentioned you're working with at-risk kids, you're teaching leadership development and kind of outdoor stuff, which is awesome. Let's talk a little bit about just the general topic of that and leadership development, right? Because I always say, like, this podcast is secretly a venue for me to ask questions I need to ask. So like, I am in the process of, I'm trying to mentor leaders in my company, right? And I'm trying to teach leadership skills, which in many ways are a lot more difficult than like a technical skill where you can just say, here is how you do it, right? So when you're working with at-risk kids, you're working with people who, maybe have traumatic backgrounds or they've got a lot of experience they're bringing to this kind of situation. How did you think through teaching them leadership, right? Did you have a really strong philosophy of leadership that you were sort of directly expressing? Was it like, hey, it's more about personality traits and we build sort of grit and all that stuff? How did you think about that process? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So it started, again, rudimentary. It wasn't like, okay, this is my end goal. Part of it was, I want to make a difference. I don't want to sit behind a desk. I want to be active. And we were solving problems a lot with Los Angeles Unified School District, and then it kind of grew from there. Mm-hmm. And some other schools that had we had like a low ropes course that we kind of built basically that was about problem solving skills, and we kind of let the kids run with it, and then it kind of grew from there. The school districts would get grant money on smoking cessation programs, and so we got money and we gave the money to the kids, but with the focus of like, okay, you guys are going to put on this smoking cessation event versus teachers doing it or parents doing it. The kids did it. They were empowered to come up with cool ideas. I mean, they would walk out with like a casket with like a 1,000 butts that they picked up on the campus, and like different, like we had music and just cool events that the kids put together. And so it was that much more impactful. And these weren't necessarily your typical leaders at the school, but we gave them that creative outlet. We gave them, we kind of guided that, the talk, whatever, the round table, and let them, come up with the ideas. And then it just kept growing from there. We had anti-violence campaigns, and we had the grand event that we did at the end of the year. We had a program at Paramount Studios. We did this for, 5 years, where we had music competitions, art, spoken word, all these different like arts that were getting cut from schools, and just allowed them to really kind of put it on. And so it really evolved to something hugely impactful. And thankfully we were able to get grant money through the school districts, and we partnered with a couple other community organizations to lead this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a cool idea, right? Because I think so much of that stuff that you're talking about, it's more impactful when it comes from the peer group rather than saying like, hey, fellow kids, like kind of put the hat backwards and, like that kind of thing. I think it's so much more effective that way. So let me ask you, because that's such a wide ranging in sort of experience that strikes me, because you are both building the organization, which, like you said, I think is at 700 employees, right? So this massive organization, and you're teaching kids and empowering kids to develop these traits. I'm curious for you today, when you're at Break of Day Capital and you're thinking about your business today, how do you assess leadership in other people, right? Like, what do you look for if you're looking at a new hire or you're looking at a team member or something like that? What do you look for to kind of indicate to you that that person has the capacity to be a really good leader?
Yeah, great question. And everyone's leadership, everyone's style will be different. Not one person's going to be the same. And so proactiveness is key. Building consensus.
Yeah.
Although the person still needs to make their own decision, but you need to empower others and get their input. And that's really important. We were doing site visits yesterday, and the property manager was like, well, that's just my opinion. And I'm like, it matters. Like, your boots on the ground. I need to hear from you. I need your voice.
Right.
You'll know better than anyone what happens at your site. So proactiveness, building consensus, being able to communicate that in a clear and concise way, and just holding that that person's able to hold himself accountable too, because that's very important. It can't be someone that is blaming others all the time. They have to be accountable. That's probably the most important thing.
Yeah.
Like they're wanting to learn and grow and be accountable. I mean, that part is huge.
And it's hard to teach that, right? Or maybe impossible to teach that in a lot of ways. Yeah, I mean, I very much had a very experience that aligns with that very closely. And that was the one thing where, I ended up parting ways with this person who had been on my team for a long time. And the way I ended up feeling about it was, I would do anything to give you what you need, but I can't make you care about being accountable to this standard, right? Like, that's just table stakes. That's how you get in, right? And if you're not there with me, then there's not really much we can do. So let me ask you this, because I'm curious about this too. Obviously, lots of real estate investors, particularly when they start to scale and they start to scale up their deal flow, they start to build a team for the first time, or think about, adding an acquisitions person or whatever, even a virtual assistant, something like that. So where do you think most entrepreneurs go wrong when it comes to leading their teams, right? Being the leader? Like, what are the mistakes that you see people making that you think are slowing their growth or maybe holding them back?
Yeah, I think there's accountability measure. It's trust but verify. Because when someone leaves, typically you're like, oh, I thought they were doing all these different things, and you're like, you didn't know that because you didn't check.
All right, I feel like you're reading my diary now. You're secretly off camera, because I just went through this where I was like, oh, this person's doing a great job. And then they left, and I was like, oh, let's get the thing. And I was like, oh, no, they weren't doing that.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's something I feel.
And I think an employee is typically like, you don't trust me, you're micromanaging me, because I've had that pushback a lot. I'm like, no, I just need to see measurables. Show me. I don't care if you got 100 rejections. Show me the list, and let's talk about what didn't work. Let's work together and figure it out. Like, I'm going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. That's fine. But let's learn together so we can improve it. And it's not about like, oh, like, you're getting it done. Let's have some conversations around it.
Right. It's funny, like that difference in reaction. I think I've told this story before, but there's one time I went on a vacation with my wife. It was like the first time we'd been on a vacation with that since we'd had kids, and it was just us, right? So my mom took the kids or whatever. It was a big deal. We went out to La Jolla in California. It's beautiful out there. Right? It was awesome. And like on the plane there, I read a blog post about some CEO guy who every quarter has his wife like make him a report card, of like a husband report card. Like, where am I falling down? Where am I doing well? Because he wants to, be a really good husband, really good father, et cetera. And I was like, oh, that's right in my alley. I love this so much. I want this. So I'm like pitching my wife on it. I was like, we should do this. Like, this is great. Like, I want you to give me a report card. And she's like, okay, sure. But why don't you do mine first? Right. And it's like, looking back on it now, I'm like, this was where I completely drove off the cliff. But I was like, I'd probably rate you 85, out of 100 or whatever, which I thought was good. And she was like, 85? And then we got in a huge fight, right? I almost ruined the vacation. So it's like, to me, it was like, having a score excites me because it shows me where I can do better. Right. But there are some people, too, that when you give them you're like a number, here's a number you're accountable for, they interpret that as like, well, that's where I'm falling down, and they feel judged. Right. So it does strike me that you've got to handle that in the right way to kind of get that across to your team. Do you find that to be the case?
Yeah, it's very important to sandwich, all the good stuff, then talk about, a couple things to work on, and back to the good stuff again. And that humans are emotional. I relearned that all the time. We just had a conversation about that yesterday. We're all sensitive, and we forget that you don't need to beat around the bush, but just be, cognizant of other people's feelings and how they're going to receive things,
Yeah. Yeah. It's that layer of emotion. Sometimes it's easy to forget that it's there if you're like spreadsheet guy, which I am. Spreadsheet guy. I love that kind of stuff.
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed part 1 of this episode. It's just too good to limit to one show. Join us next week to hear the rest.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.